Yay, the Game of Thrones is back. So, House of the Dragon, let's talk about this. I've just watched the first two episodes. I believe I'll be continuing it as soon as possible. But this is a thing that's going to happen gradually, and so I probably may not make a review unless something really big happens in between. Because I prefer to finish the series before I review the entire thing. But I guess you only have one chance to make a first impression, and the first episode of this series is what I'm really going to touch on here. So, House of the Dragon, which is based on, the I guess it's called Blood and Fire. It's also another kind of book that's written by George R. R. Martin. And the thing about the original Game of Thrones is that it's really driven by shock factor, violence, what do you call this? Um, the freedom to express their sexuality, the power that they have as, people who are, owners of their respective kingdoms, being royalty and such. And so some common people do come into the light only because of their exceptional skill and talent. But in general, it's all about the what do you call this? The royalties, because this is about the Game of Thrones. When I watched the House of the Dragon, one thing is that was unique is that this one really had good world building. It showed a lot of atmosphere, showed a lot of story that's going on, a lot of politics, and this one really seems like it's going to be a very political driven story. But it kind of lacked the shock factor of the first episode of the original Game of Thrones. If you guys need to be reminded, um, a bunch of Lannister twins were actually banging each other, and they pushed a kid out of the window that should have died. And a guy was beheaded in the opening scene because he believed that these White Walkers are coming. Winter is coming, gets thrown out here and there. Robert Baratheon comes to visit Eddard Stark. It's just so iconic in the first episode of the original Game of Thrones, and the shock factor that happens in the end, the way the story builds and tells itself. And that shock factor carries on to further episodes and really tells you never to be invested in any character. And so the final main two characters, which end up being Daenerys Targaryen and Jon Snow, they really are only protected after the fifth or sixth season, where you feel like the stakes get lower and lower because these two really can't die because the show has to protect them for the finale. But despite the horror of the last two seasons, which were really bad in Game of Thrones, the first 3 or 4 seasons were exceptionally strong, and they really did bring in a lot of characters to build their story to get you invested in. And I think even Hodor had some of the best side character stories I had seen in any fantasy, right? Hodor was exceptionally loving, he was caring, he was helpful. He's this just big, like gentle giant who's not really gentle because he is actually very strong if used properly, but he doesn't know how to control himself. And so one of the Starks who actually gains the power to control lesser beings learns how to help him because he's apparently treated like a lesser being because his brain is actually damaged. And all of that is because of a seizure that he got from this sci-fi sequence where, you know, uh, the one with the power basically goes back, the one-eyed owl or something goes back into the past to control his mind to uh, get him to, like control his strength, so that in the future he can actually help to hold this door while they escape. And that entire sequence was just done so brilliantly as he dies holding the door, and that sequence actually forces his past self to be drilled with the sentence "hold the door," and because of the brain seizure that he has as a result of the time travel events, he ends up becoming a Hodor. And so there are such amazing sequences in the previous season, and I'm sure this is still early and they might be building towards it. But the first episode did not have the shock factor of the first episode of the original Game of Thrones. It was not as exciting or as interesting. It just tells you that there are these characters, this is the world, this is the politics, this is the girl who's going to be some sort of a possible queen in the future. King Viserys Targaryen is the one who's currently leading the house. He has a brother, Drogon or Dragon. Uh, Drago. I think it's something like that, Drogon or Drago Targaryen. He's the one who's leading the against the Kingsguard, and he's sort of um, abusing his power to control the streets by any means. And you can show a little bit of respect for him because he's just executing punishment that the king wants, that all the kings do, right? But it's just a bit brutal. And Viserys is shown as a little bit of a softer king, which might change. I don't know. But he has a daughter who so far just seems to be fulfilling her role as a daughter, mother who's gonna, who's giving birth. And so, yeah, they do have some powerful and emotional scenes, in, the sense where this mother, has to give birth to his child who he hopes is a son. Um, and yeah, the one that really does get the knife, I guess, first is his wife, the king's wife, who is who dies of childbirth. But this is not a very shocking sequence or death because it happens a lot back then, right? How many women do die of childbirth? Um, especially before they had the proper types of anesthesia to use or sedation to use to actually comfort them and give them a way to prevent them from feeling pain while protecting the child. Because if you over sedate a mother, the child, is going to die from the drugs that go into their body. And also, you can't kill the mother and deliver the child. I think that's the sequence that happens, right? They try to do a child delivery where they are forced to keep the mom alive because the mother is what supplies oxygen to the kid, and so they can't bring the baby out after killing the mother, and so they have to keep her alive. And also, they don't have the proper technology to sedate her, and so they have to perform a cesarean while she's still alive. And so yeah, they have that amazing sequence where she has to be cut open and the child has to be forced out. And I think, yeah, all of that is, you know, interesting. They try to use that as sort of the shock factor. The wife apparently dies in childbirth. But I guess what adds on to it is the fact that the child doesn't survive, or at least that's what it turns out to be. We don't know if the child is actually given away or still alive, but the scene is cut to after the delivery to show when the mother is wrapped up to be I guess is it cremated? Yeah, to be cremated. The child's body is also in a little mummified wrap, so we don't really see their faces, but they are cremated together. Um, the daughter here of King Viserys shouts out Dracarys, and so the dragon ignites them in flames. And so in this era, they also have a lot of dragons, apparently 10 dragons or something. They said the Targaryen house stood at the height of its power with 10 dragons. But even at the height of its power, it seems so unstable. Um, yeah, under Viserys' rule, it seems like everyone's just questioning his authority because he doesn't have a son, male heir, basically a son. Although he does have a younger brother who, yeah, they feel is too violent and all that. So anyway, just want to give my thoughts and sort of I guess, a basic review because I really want to wait for the rest of the season to come out before I judge it. So far, from what I see, it's very politically driven. It's an interesting story. The idea of a father wanting a male heir, I think, is not uncommon. Those days, it's very, very common. These days, maybe not so much, but there are still people who want a male heir because I guess they want to get them involved in, I don't know, sports or something like that. That's the only thing I can really think of because, today women are given equal education opportunity for everything else. So if treated right, there's really nothing a woman can't do, right? Yeah, besides, I guess, being the greatest sportsman or something. That's something you really need a boy for. Unless you want to be like the Williams sisters, which is totally doable. Um, so anyway, it's something that I hope builds on. It's not as exciting as the first episode of the original Game of Thrones, but it has its own thing going on, and perhaps the shock factors continue to come on later. I hope they don't protect their characters too much. Like we know probably that the daughter here will never die. I think her name is Rhaenyra Targaryen. I think it's quite obvious that she's never gonna die because she's like the plot armor character here. But I don't know about the rest. Matt Smith is also acting as a potential plot armor character. So I guess he's also probably gonna be invincible throughout the story. Um, and so Yeah, Daemon Targaryen, right? That's his name. So Daemon is gonna be invincible for sure. And then I guess Rhaenyra is gonna be invincible for sure. Wait, where is Rhaenyra? Oh, there, she's all the way down here. Oh, that's interesting. Okay. Why they put all the way down there? But yeah, regardless, I just hope they don't immortalize all of these other characters because one of the key, shock factors of Game of Thrones is the fact that you can't be too invested in any of the characters because you don't really know what's going to happen to them. And all of that disappeared after season 5, I believe, where every character really had to be protected because they were building up for the finale. And even then, I believe we got the deaths of Grey Worm, and I can't remember who else it was. Sir, I mean, yeah, there were a few people who did die, but they were not as important as the initial, families of the cast. Like, if you talk about the original Game of Thrones, right? Let's say, Rhaenyra's base, Daenerys was there. Basically, her entire family is gonna die. That's the way the original Game of Thrones went. Even for the Starks, Eddard Stark died in what, episode 2 or something. So I'm really not sure how this is whether it's gonna carry that or it's just gonna be very political and very slow. Um, so yeah, I'm looking forward. Maybe I'll get back to you guys in between if something shocking happens. Otherwise, if it's just gonna be a plot armors, where every character is just gonna survive because they need them for the next episode, I may not find it as exciting as the original one. But yeah, so just to let you guys know, Game of Thrones. There we go. So as for the original Game of Thrones, if you guys are wondering my opinion, I had rated the original Game of Thrones a 9 out of 10. The only reason I didn't give it 10 because of the last 2 or 3 horrible seasons it had. But it still deserves a 9 because it was one of the most amazing TV series to come out after a long time, with a lot of interesting information and ideas. And sure, it's based on the book that is written by George Martin, but despite that, it has a lot of exciting scenes and emotional moments, and it did have its own twists at times. And yeah, it's like this amazing sci-fi action medieval drama, right? It is sort of sci-fi actually. But yeah, this is my original rating, so we'll see how the new one goes, and I'll get back to you guys. So that's it for me. See you guys in the next one. Take care. Maybe we'll talk about the horror that's happening in the Lord of the Rings end, but until then, take care.